If you've heard one word about tequila over the past few years, chances are it was additive-free. Between articles, cocktails, marketing campaigns, and lawsuits, it's gone truly mainstream in a way that I've found pretty surprising, honestly. I cover agave spirits for a living, so there's a certain amount of talk I expect to hear from other people in the industry, but it's gotten to the point where my friends who, God bless them, mostly drink Fireball and White Claw, have begun to start asking me what's going on. And I don't always know what to say, because truth be told, it's never been more difficult to talk about additive-free tequila. Due to some icky legal drama with regulators behind the scenes, brands can no longer label or market themselves as additive-free in the United States as of October of last year. And the powers that be have made sure it stays that way. Famously, Patron rolled out a marketing campaign here in the US a few months back, advertising its no secret ingredients additive-free recipe. They were met with a 4-day export ban by regulators, which in Patron money has to be millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. Now, Patron did swing back with a very clever marketing campaign that literally censored the words additive-free on all those billboards, but it kind of just goes to reinforce the point, which is that additive-free tequila is very hush-hush right now for all the wrong reasons. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, which is why I think it's helpful to break down some of the most common myths. First is the definition, or more often than not, the lack thereof. Back when Tequila Matchmaker was testing agave spirits for additives, they were looking for 4 additives known as abocantes. Those include glycerin for achieving a smooth mouthfeel, oak extract for adding aromas and flavors of barrel aging, caramel coloring to add a darker tint, and sugar-based syrup, which is exactly what it sounds. It adds sugar and syrup. If you hear an influencer or a YouTuber talking about additives, those are the 4 additives they're talking about. If distillers include less than 1% of those 4 additives in the bottle, they can still label it as 100% Blue Weber agave tequila under the current regulations. However, and this is the big however, abocantes are not the end of the story. So long as additives achieve certain chemical parameters by the Tequila Regulatory Council standards, they can be included in the bottle without any disclosure. There are a ton of examples that get into complicated chemical type words that are a little bit outside of my vocabulary, but some of the most common ones that people have identified are fermentation additives like acids and nitrogen sources, as well as viscosity additives including pectin and glycol. This is especially important to remember now in 2025 because of the iffy regulatory landscape. Since there's no one testing tequila for additives these days, brands can say in their press releases that they're additive free when in reality they're not talking about the same additives that we are. I'll tell you that I've tried a few tequilas over the past few months that have said they were additive free on paper, but absolutely did not taste the part. And I'm not really sure what to think about it, other than to say that it's just become a lot more complicated to make sense of any of these words anymore. There are a ton of great brands that were confirmed as additive-free back in Tequila Matchmaker's heyday, but these days, additive-free, for new brands at least, is about as helpful a descriptor as gourmet or ultra-premium. That is to say, you should do your own research. Myth number 2 is the hand rub. This is the one that I get asked about the most, I think because it has this really tangible quality to it that anyone can replicate. According to viral claims on social media that I may or may not have circulated in the past as well, if you pour tequila with additives on your hand and rub them together, it'll stick almost like a maple syrup. Supposedly, if the tequila doesn't contain additives, your hands will come apart like you just washed them in water. Now, this test can be helpful, but more often than not, the results are going to be iffy at best. The biggest reason being that additives are not an all or nothing game. Some brands put in a ton of syrupy sweet sugar and others put in just a drop. I think the biggest difference comes down especially to glycerin and sugar-based syrups, which I believe would stick to your hand, whereas oak extract and caramel coloring probably wouldn't do much. The other thing to remember is that there's just a ton of environmental factors at play. I am someone who tends to run a little hot on the internal body temperature side of things, and I have tried this before and I don't think I was doing it quite right. I remember the first time I ever visited a tequila distillery in Mexico, I had just read about this test beforehand and I was very excited to try it out for myself. We spent the day walking around in 85, 90 degree weather in the fields, got into the factory where it was even hotter with all the steam coming out from the fermentation tanks, and then we went to the cellar, which was cooler but still really damp. and they poured us up this line of tequila in these champagne glasses, and I sort of looked at myself, and I poured it into my hand, and I started rubbing it together, and I think they were already so sticky that anything I poured onto them would have stuck together like glue. I later found out that the distillery was definitely not additive-free, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you at that point, especially not with the hand test. The third myth is the historical use of additives. I think because we're in a culture right now that's been talking a lot about health consciousness by way of ingredients like Red 40, corn syrup, and all that other bad stuff, it's easy to imagine that additives are a modern concession for modern tastes, which is true in its own way, but according to the records, additives have been used in tequila for centuries. So the story goes, additives were first used in tequila back in the 1860s to cover up the flavor of agave that had been tainted by fungal blight. And it wasn't until 1873 that Jose Cuervo exported its first bottles of tequila to the United States. All of that's to say, if your great-great-great-grandparents were sipping tequila back in their day, there's a good chance it contained just as much additives, if not more, than today's supply. Myth number 4 is the 1% volume limit. As I touched on before, brands are allowed to include 1% of the 4 abocantes in the bottle and still call it 100% Blue Weber agave tequila. But there's 2 versions of the story you'll see making the rounds online. Some people say that it's 1% of all of the additives taken together, while others say that it's 1% of each of the 4 additives, ultimately making up for 4% of the total volume in the bottle. What's difficult about this is reading through the regulations. The definitions are so vague. It is impossible to make sense of it, and they change all the time. Depending on how you interpret the wording, it can definitely go one way or the other. But there is a clear-cut answer. The founder of Tequila Matchmaker once asked regulators and producers what the limit was, and both agreed that it was 1% of the total volume of the bottle, not 1% of each of the additives. The caveat being that the Tequila Regulatory Council does not test the tequila for additives. Instead, producers keep a logbook that is then checked by inspectors in good faith. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that's a pretty bad way of verifying whether or not a tequila is additive-free, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I will leave it at that. Myth number 5 is mixto tequilas, and this one requires a bit of a flashback. Before additive-free tequila was the word on the tip of everyone's tongue, the big distinction that you were told to look out for was mixto tequila versus 100% Blue Weber agave tequila. Mixtos, spelled M-I-X-T-O, are a legally permissible type of tequila that contains 51% agave-derived liquor and 49% something else, usually sugarcane alcohol or something in that ballpark. If you went to a liquor store in college and grabbed a bottle of tequila under 30 or 40 bucks, chances are it was a mixto. Interestingly enough though, mixto tequila and additive-free tequila are not mutually exclusive. They sometimes overlap. The main example of this is El Tequileño Blanco. El Tequileño is a fantastic distiller that's been in the game since way back in 1959. And they've done a lot of really great bottlings over the years. Reposados, añejos, extra añejos, everything you could dream of. It's an additive-free brand, but their flagship $25 Blanco that you can find on most liquor store shelves in the United States is 70% agave spirits and 30% unrefined Mexican cane sugar. And it's not bad stuff. El Tequileño Blanco was the original tequila used in La Patanga, a now very established cocktail that combines Coca-Cola, salt, lime, and of course, tequila. Though it's a tequila that you're more likely to get a hangover from, it doesn't contain the 4 abocantes that we usually talk about as additives, and it is thus additive-free. Moral of the story, it is all a matter of perspective. Though I can't think of any other additive-free mixto tequilas off the top of my head. If you can think of any, be sure to drop them in the comments below. This is a topic I'm interested in learning a little bit more about down the road. My name is Pedro Wolfe, and this is the Tequila Pour. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're interested in learning more about tequila, mezcal, bacanora, and all the other great Mexican agave spirits that make the industry what it is.